Hello and welcome to France 24. Welcome for an interview with the President of Argentina, Alberto Fernández. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. President.
A pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
I want to begin with Venezuela. In Paris, there was a meeting between the French President, the President of Colombia, and yourself, and with representatives from the opposition and the government. Is there a real possibility that a dialogue could be restarted between both camps?
I decidedly believe that, yes, it's been several years that something that was called the contact group was formed, led by Norway with Mexico and Argentina, and the parties wanted the Venezuelans to sit and resolve their differences. This was difficult to do because during the Trump years, Donald Trump did everything that was possible to divide Venezuela and leave Venezuela in isolation. President Macron called upon us, and I think that a major step has been taken in order that the dialogue can be resumed between the part of the opposition that still resists establishing a dialogue with President Maduro and the government of President Maduro. This was the part of the opposition that was still questioning the government of President Maduro, and we want the dialogue to be resumed and a mechanism to be found for democratic living together and to facilitate the development of Venezuela, because Venezuela is suffering very difficult economic sanctions.
You spoke about those sanctions with the White House. What do they say in Washington? You were in touch with the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan about this issue.
I've spoken several times.
What are they saying?
And I think that the economic sanctions applied by Trump were really brutal for Venezuela. And the consequence was isolating Venezuela, and that left the effects that we have all seen. Venezuela was impoverished, and millions of Venezuelans migrated out of it. And I think that the Biden administration has a more reasonable view about the conflict. And I think that we can move towards them also helping reach a definitive solution.
Lifting sanctions?
Yes, of course. The European Union also has to work towards this goal, because the same day that we were meeting with Macron and Petro, that very day the European Union was renewing its sanctions on Venezuela. We have to put an end to this.
Should there be an end to the recognition of Juan Guaidó as the leader of Venezuela?
Well, Juan Guaidó is something weird that it is still recognized as the president of Venezuela, because there's no legitimacy whatsoever.
So the EU and the US should change tack.
Yes, decidedly, because all of this, the world fell into Donald Trump's trap that sort of built this president that was elected in a very weird way in a square with a group of congressmen in Venezuela. And I think that we have to put an end to this, and we have to acknowledge the Venezuelan authorities.
I want to turn to another situation that has people very preoccupied here in Europe, the war in Ukraine. You said at the Paris Peace Forum, we have the ethical imperative not to be quiet, and we have the ethical imperative to be very clear. So Lula from Brazil said recently that Volodymyr Zelensky was just as responsible for the war in Ukraine as Vladimir Putin. Is it also your opinion?
Well, wars are like tango. It takes two to tango. But the responsibilities are not the same. Of course, there was someone who invaded the other person's territory, and this is the one that starts the problem.
Vladimir Putin.
Of course. And the other has to defend himself. What is clear is that at this point of things, it's the two that have to find a solution, the president of Ukraine and the president of Russia.
But they don't want it.
Absolutely. A solution has to be found. The war is not the solution. Whenever there's a war, truth disappears. So the war cannot be a solution in a world that has had so many dead because of the pandemic, and now they're dead because of a territorial dispute.
And an invasion.
And an invasion like that of Russia to Ukraine. So war today needs the two of them, but actually someone started, and Russia did, which should have not invaded the Ukrainian territory.
What can be done? There's the G20 summit in Bali.
I have been speaking to Macron for a long time, and thank God we have had very good understanding and dialogue. The first thing that I want the world to understand is that the war that is going on in the northern hemisphere is also felt by the southern hemisphere. So I want the southern hemisphere to be heard in the quest for peace. There's nothing more revolutionary than to call for the peace in the current world. In the world that we live in, we cannot live in a state of war. It is a very bloody war, because besides the shots and the deaths and the armies that are fighting each other, there is a continent that is suffering, which is Europe. It is suffering because of lack of energy and also because of food supply problems. And there is a hemisphere, which is the southern hemisphere, where the FAO is predicting a hunger that is going to affect 300 million people, almost all of them in the southern hemisphere. So we cannot be complacent with this reality. And this is why I am proposing that we sit to demand from the parties in dispute that they sit to try to find a way out based on dialogue, a ceasefire, that they find a way out and put an end to this war that is affecting many people, many more people than Europe, and that all of the parties involved, the United States, Europe, NATO, Russia, the Ukraine, should sit and find a solution.
The free trade agreement between the Mercosur bloc and the European Union is blocked since 2019. The EU diplomat-in-chief said recently that he hoped that it would finally be implemented in 2023. Is this your belief?
I think that the link between the European Union and the Mercosur should be a privileged one. I believe in this. I believe in this agreement. But this agreement has to take into account the asymmetries that exist. If these things are not taken into account, we are going to have problems. President Macron insisted very much on the lack of attention of Bolsonaro on the Amazon, and I share his view. But now we have Lula, and this lack of attention on the Amazon is going to disappear. But what it is going to make evident is that France does not want to put an end to the agricultural subsidies, which is one of the causes that is preventing the agreement. There's also everything that has to do with the automotive industry. Argentina and Brazil are both of them car producers for the whole of the America. And the sudden arrival of the European industry can be a big problem for our economies. What I think is that we should once again sit and analyze these two problems, the agricultural problem for the European part and the car problem for Brazil and Argentina. But of these two, we should leave them aside and see how we can progress with the other problems, because the vocation is there without a doubt.
So 2023 looks difficult.
I think it will be difficult.
I want to turn to the internal political situation in Argentina. There are tensions between you and the Vice President, Cristina Kirchner. Those tensions are supposed to be solved through a primary, an internal primary, in 2023. Will they take place?
I always say the same thing to this question. First, the tensions are not as major as the press puts it. They are not so major. Frankly, they're not. We have different views about some things. Yes, we do, such as life. But what we are all sure about is the need to go on together in order to prevent the past from coming back to Argentina. And for this, we have to be together. We're going to solve things as they are solved in democracies, and without a doubt, we're going to work and talk with the components of the front in order to find the best ways out. My responsibility now is to govern and to solve all of the problems that you were asking about, which is inflation, the deterioration of salaries, and I have to concentrate on solving these problems. And when the elections come, we will solve them as in democracy.
Will you be a candidate?
I don't think about that.
Really? It's difficult to believe a politician.
Now, really frankly, my major preoccupation is that Argentina, once and for all, goes into a pathway of growth and better income distribution. This is my greatest obsession. I know that we have acted in presidency in such a way that in terms of institutional quality cannot be criticized. Many of the bad practices that we have seen in Argentina over the past few years and decades have disappeared in our administration, and I'm very proud of this. And I want to leave firm foundations so that the same practices do not come back in the future.
When will you make your decision?
When the time of the primaries come, that will be in the middle of the year.
I want to speak about the Football World Cup. It's about to begin in Qatar. There's a big controversy here in Europe about the labor conditions of workers, foreign workers there. The former trainer of the Argentine Commission, Jorge Sampaoli, said recently the FIFA decided to play in a place where this shouldn't be done, only for money, only for business. What do you think of that?
Oh, what a topic. Well, the truth is that the choice of Qatar as a whole made the FIFA Gate scandal come out alight. This is the truth. But now it is a fact. We have to go to Qatar and win the World Championship, which is what Argentinians want. If I say anything else about all of the rest, it will be irresponsible on my part. I always say that as I feel very free, I say what I think. But as I'm responsible, I think of what I say. So it is a delicate matter. It is clear that there is a gray area in this World Cup, which came to light with the FIFA Gate. But what we Argentinians have to think about now is to see how we can win the championship with Messi. We have a great team and a great coach.
Alberto Fernández, thank you very much for appearing here on the France 24 interview, and thank you for watching it.